What's up, Game Boys and Girls? Big T here, back with another video. And yes, I am talking about, again, my favorite gaming console of all time, the Nintendo 64. And I just want to, kind of reiterate why I think, it's so important and impactful in gaming history, and why it's my favorite. Because people will say, it has a lot of shortcomings, and it does. And I'll point some of those out. But I want to focus on, you know, uh, how it was more impactful, even with those shortcomings, because of what it brought to the table, especially at that time in video gaming. I think a lot of people will, when they look back on it, they talk about game consoles and whatnot. They forget the impact of what it meant to the medium at the time, and also how it affected gaming going into the future. And I would say the N64 is one of the most, if not the most, innovative and impactful consoles that ever came out. So let's go ahead and get to it. So, like I said, you guys already know, if you've been a subscriber of mine, that N64 is my favorite console of all time. The games certainly stood the test of time for me, and they just are more impactful in my memory of gaming than pretty much every other console. So why is that? All right, so let's look at the N64. So right here, I have your base N64 unit. That is the base gray, or I think they called it charcoal or something when it came out. I always loved this design of the console. It just looks like a gaming console, and Nintendo was very good at that. I think the other systems that came out subsequently after the N64 started to look less like consoles and more like something that fits well into your entertainment system, or entertainment center, or more like mini PCs or something. That's basically where we are now. Although I would say the PS5 doesn't really look like, but it has elements of it, and obviously it's more curvier, but it's not a striking look. It didn't look like a game console. It looks like a game console, but I'm saying it didn't look, in the history of gaming consoles, more like what traditional consoles look like. More look at me type of kind of aesthetics to them. And I think the N64 did that really well. And on the front, you can see right away there's the 4 controller ports, which is a big thing about this console, is the 4-player out of the box, as long as you get all the controllers, aspect to it. So you have here your power button, up and down, on and off, your reset button. Here you have a air vent here. This is where your cartridge goes. Obviously, you use your power light there, and your 4 controller ports, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And right here is one of the coolest things about the N64 to me, because Nintendo consoles and other consoles as well always had an expansion port on the unit that pretty much never got used, at least not by the gaming public. Maybe some developers use it in certain ways, but right here on top, there's a port. So put that open. I don't have it in here right now, but I'm going to show you what's up. There's a little thing in there usually called a jumper pack, and it was I'm not sure if I don't know if it gave it anything other than like power to the unit itself, but you can expand on it. That's what an expansion port is. You can expand on it with this cool little device here called a expansion card. What is it called? I forget already what it's called. The 4 megabyte expansion pack. Yeah, so it added 4 megabytes of RAM to your console, and that is hardware. That's a hardware upgrade that on the consumer level, which was pretty much mind blowing at the time. Nobody had done that, and other than like switching out your hard drive, nobody still does that. I mean, actually adding to the system memory of your console, that was crazy at the time, and I'm really surprised that nobody has really done that in the future. Either there's developing issues or development issues why people don't do that, or why consoles and companies haven't done that since. But I thought it was amazing at the time, obviously. And so you put this bad boy in here. I'll put them in backwards. Slide it down in there. I don't want to push it all the way down because it's kind of tough to pull out. And you got 4 megabytes more, so you can get more frame rates, you can get sharper textures, that kind of stuff added to games. And obviously, I'll get into it later, but certain games wouldn't even work without this bad boy, so you needed it. But yeah, that is a really cool, innovative thing that, like I said, I'm surprised people haven't expanded on and continue to do. But there it is. So, and then another good thing I liked about it, I don't have it with me here, and I don't want to pull mine out, but this is where your AC adapter went. So it was external. So instead of making the console bigger and maybe even hotter, Nintendo decided to put this kind of cool way of doing it, where you just slap in here your AC adapter, and it comes out with a little cord, and that doesn't add size and weight to your console. That was also a really good thing that a lot of companies did after that. Actually, Nintendo went back to an internal one with the GameCube, but it was so well designed, didn't even matter. But most of the other companies, actually no, Sony never did that. I don't think. Microsoft did it to where the actual power brick was on the outside of the console. So yeah, and like I said, I just love the kind of sleek design this thing has. It looks like a game console. I mean, you won't confuse it with something else. You won't confuse it with a VCR or a DVD player or anything like that, or a mini PC. This is a gaming console, so I love that. To continue on with the hardware, actually, let me pull up the controller here. This is the standard N64 controller. This is a work of art as far as I'm concerned, and for whatever reasons, it's become cool to like rag on this controller, which is kind of weird and insane to me. You can say that the design of the analog stick had a major flaw as far as like, rubbing plastic against plastic. You get chalking up going on in here, but that is a minor thing when it comes to how cool this controller is. Alright, so here you have the 4 C buttons, which are camera buttons. So your left, right, up, and down. And this was really cool for first-person shooters, which I'm going to get into in a minute, especially at that time. And you have your action button, A and B, your start button right there, big start button in the middle, and you have your D-pad over here. And the contention, like I said, recently, in the last, I don't know, it's not really recent, but like I'd say in the last 5 to 10 years on YouTube especially, there's been a lot of, oh my god, how do I hold this controller, and all this kind of just silly nonsense, usually by millennial YouTubers. And I don't say that to disparage millennials, but I say that because when the N64 came out, they weren't quite old enough to have like the full picture of the N64 or gaming at the time. I was a teenager, I was in high school. So I had a better picture of what gaming was and how big this was at the time. If you're like 4 years old when you got this, then even 10 years old maybe, you didn't understand the true impact of this at the time. So recently, a lot of those guys are bigger YouTubers, and it's like a rite of passage to rag on this controller. When this controller was fantastic, and it was very cool because you can hold it in 2 different ways depending on what type of game you played. If you're playing a 2D game, you put your hands on the outside here and you're holding it so you can hit the D-pad and your action buttons and your shoulder buttons. Now if you're playing a 3D game, make sure my thing's still running here. Playing a 3D game, you hold your hand here, your left hand here, your right hand here, and you're still getting 2 shoulder buttons because you get the trigger button here, the Z trigger, and you get the right shoulder button. So you're not losing anything except for the D-pad, which you don't need unless there's like some really like intricate. I don't think there was many in games like that. That was like menu systems or something like that, or menu items you can put to the D-pad. Most everything used your face buttons here when you're doing a 3D game, especially like a shooter. And this game, this control scheme is fantastic, and it feels very good in the hands. It's very comfortable, very comfortable. Is it the most comfortable? No, but it felt very comfortable. This controller here, to me, was expertly designed. And another cool thing about it, it also has an expansion port on it, which is, very cool, and mimicked and copied later by Sega. The expansion pack, or expansion port, I should say, is for memory cards. And the big thing in these times is that a lot of everybody else is using CDs, like CD-based consoles, CD-based gaming consoles, and so CDs you can't rewrite them, you can't hold memory on the CD, so everything needed a memory card. The N64 didn't necessarily need memory cards because you can put memory chips onto the cartridges themselves because it still used cartridges, but it cost more, and so companies didn't want to do that. And so they, to get around it, they would just say you needed a memory card. And, most, like I said, all consoles needed a memory card at that time. So it wasn't a big deal. You probably would expect you didn't need one. And all of Nintendo first party games did not need memory cards at all. I'm thinking maybe Pokemon Stadium. I don't think so, though. I think most, if not all, Nintendo first and second party used memory on the cartridge itself. Third party would opt out because it was cheaper to not have to put memory onto the cart. So you would get this is a official N64 memory card. It's a lot of bright light on it there. I don't know if you can. It's kind of hard to see, but you know what it is. You know what it looks like. There's the. This is really hard to tell. Yeah, so I'm just trying to get you to see that little sticker there. And there you go with the cartridge slot there. So, plug it in. The game would prompt you to say, hey, you want to save your game here. You could plop it in, save your game, and it didn't need to be in the whole time. If you had a different thing you wanted to plug into your expansion port, you could do that after the game prompted you. Okay, you can take it out and put in something else. All right, and we'll get to something else in a minute here. But the controller itself is fantastic. This is my day one N64 controller. As you can see, the stick still snaps back into place. Obviously, not all of them lasted this well. And part of that is because I got other consoles and other controllers later on, so I wasn't using this all the time throughout the years. I had other controllers that I was working with or whatnot. And it's funny because I think that's a similar thing when it comes to like the Joy-Cons. People will say, "Oh, my Joy-Cons are fine." Well, how much do you use them? You're probably using the Pro controller a lot, and so your Joy-Cons didn't get the same amount of wear that my Joy-Cons got because I used them all the time. Even though I had a Pro controller, I would still use my Joy-Cons a lot in a lot of games. And so when people would shoot me down, "Oh, no, what are you doing? I'm using it." Unlike you, who have been using your Pro controller for most of the time you had your Switch. But yeah, this obviously is still very good, snappy. There is some chalking in there, not a whole lot. And I've never cleaned this one, well, other than like taking a napkin down there and wiping it out like that. But it still works very fine, and the games works just great. And so, yeah, that's the another uses for the expansion pack, or the expansion port pack on the controller is for a very innovative game. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but I just want to show you. Yeah, I'll go with that. So I want to show you real quick. This is a third-party memory card. A lot of them were bigger. They weren't as reliable for me anyway. Some people might have better reliability with theirs, but a lot of third-party stuff in those days wasn't very reliable. So again, the N64 was about firsts, a lot of firsts. The major first is that you're going from 2D to 3D. These are first time, like certain franchises went from 2D to 3D. And Nintendo really was the only one to get it right, for the most part. So when you're talking about story franchises from the NES, the SNES, Um, Nintendo was the first to get true 3D right in these games. Games like Excitebike 64, which is fantastic. This is obviously a first-party game. This was done by Left Field, and it's different from typical Excitebike, but it just kind of expands on what Excitebike was on the NES, and it's fantastic. Like, it's a lot more sim than you would think than in arcade. You might think it was more arcade, but it's actually more simulation motorbiking. But here is a third-party game that didn't fare quite as well when it came to going from a 2D to a 3D game. Castlevania. It's often called Castlevania 64, even though it's just, as you can see, Castlevania. And they did a revision, basically, kind of an expansion, which is, I don't think that was really done before that. Maybe obviously on PC, but I think as far as game consoles go, you didn't really get expansions. And this got the expansion. I also have, and I can't think of the name of it right now. I'll show it to you. And yeah, so I can see only for N64. This was the only 3D version at the time. And I would say a lot of these 2D franchises, still haven't gotten there. Castlevania certain hasn't gotten to where, there's still classic. There's classic 3D Castlevania games happening. It hasn't happened. Mega Man is the same. A lot of these games, Contra, a lot of these games just did not do well when it came to going into the 3D plane. Nintendo seemed to make it look easy. It wasn't, but they seemed to make it look easy. Now, obviously, the big game from Nintendo that really nailed 3D, coming from franchise with 2D games with a bunch of 2D games, is Super Mario 64. Now, this game blew everybody's mind away. And again, looking back, if you're just some, late 20s or maybe early to mid 30s person that's on YouTube, you don't really understand the impact that this game had on the industry. You just look back at it as, that was a cool 3D Mario game. But no, this game influenced so many other games that came out after it, and that tried to mimic this and never really got it right. I think the closest, I would say, third-party wise, that got the 3D kind of action platformer thing right was probably Ubisoft with Rayman 2. But most paled in comparison to get it right, other than Nintendo's second party, which I'll show in representation here in a second. But this game was phenomenal. And for it to be on a cartridge and basically no loading, and it's the beautiful, vibrant graphics, the large open areas. You didn't have that weird, dithering, warpy texture thing that you would get on PlayStation. I think to Sega Saturn to some extent also did that, but not really. It was mostly a PlayStation thing where like the walls would kind of wobble. This was a solid, strong. I'm guessing it was 30 frames. Just solid frame rate game. And certain hiccups here and there, obviously, when there's a lot of things happening. But this game, blew our minds. And the best way to understand that impact is to maybe go back and look at websites that are still around and archived talking about this game, and because that way you can get a sense of how impactful it was. Or old magazines. I have a ton of old, Nintendo Pro, Game Pro, or Nintendo Power, Game Pro magazine that came out at the time, and see how they were talking about this game and the impact the N64 had. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain to somebody who was 5 years old when it came out. To somebody who was 15, 16, 17 years old when this came out. It's very different. We understood the impact a lot better. But you don't hear that a lot when it comes to a lot of these YouTubers. But anyway, so let me expand on how cool this controller was. So at the time, mostly on, well, only on PC. First-person shooters were like really blowing up. You had like Doom, Wolfenstein. There was a ton of others. I remember like Rise of the Triad. I loved Quake and all that stuff. But those were PC games because of how, at the time, first-person shooters controlled. The best way, and honestly, still the best way to play FPS is mouse and keyboard. And this was the best controller to mimic mouse and keyboard. So your movements are done by the analog stick here, as far as looking up and down, left and right. This is my control scheme. You can switch it around to whatever games you're talking about, but looking up, down, left and right, and then you're moving forward, back, left and right with the C sticks, or the C buttons here. And this is like basically having your keyboard, your arrow keys. This is up arrow, left arrow, right arrow, down arrow, or back arrow. And it was supernatural for me to play that way. So you move like this, you look around like this and shoot and aim, and then you have your trigger right there. Your fingers right on the trigger for your shooting. It was like second nature for me. To just kind of strafe using the camera buttons, and then to look and aim with the analog stick and fire. It's buttery smooth, and people don't really think about that, but I think when it comes to especially games like GoldenEye, which was a huge innovative game on a console, that's what made the multiplayer so good. If you had clunky controls in that game, it would not be fun. And like, again, I'd say a lot of the millennial guys, maybe even some Gen Zers, but not really. A lot of millennial guys will look back and they forget how, you controlling first-person shooters with a D-pad on previously. And sometimes after this game, there are a lot of games that still controlled it with the D-pad, and it was just not gamer friendly. And this control scheme, because of this controller, was so good, and it really innovated. And for the N64 anyway, there were FPSs on other consoles, but the best were on the N64, mainly because of this controller. Yes, because of the hardware as well, it handled it better, but because of this controller, it just made it a buttery smooth, for the most part, situation. So when you have a game like Turok, which came out, I believe, early '97, again, another game that just blew everybody's mind. The graphics in this game were amazing. The ambition in this game was great. The explosions, effects and whatnot, fantastic. We hadn't seen anything like this on a game console. We barely got this on a PC at the time. You got to remember, back in these days, PC wasn't so far ahead of the game consoles like they are today. PC was kind of fumbling around a lot in the mid to late 90s as far as home gaming goes, and this game just kind of came in and blew our minds. The different weapons, the environments. Yes, there was N64 fog, but that was because it was early development. You'll see later shooters that came out that didn't have all that crazy fog and whatnot, because developers had gotten a better grasp of the hardware. And so this game it just, again, blew my mind at the time, but not just my mind, everybody's mind. People loved Turok because of how well it played using this controller on a game console. It wasn't like the game was just like this amazing, never before seen type of game. What made Turok popular and fun was, yes, the weapons were very cool, but how it worked and played on the N64 is what made it so impactful and fun. And later on that year, right behind it, came out the most, especially at the time, innovative, amazing first-person shooter game, GoldenEye 007, which is often called GoldenEye 64. But as you can see right there on the system there, that little device there is the rumble pack. So when you would shoot, you'd feel a little shake, or if you got shot, or explosions, you would get rumbling in the controller. and that just took GoldenEye and games like it to a whole nother level. I don't think Turok had. It's funny how you think you remember this stuff, but I don't think Turok had Rumble. No, it didn't have Rumble yet. So this game, being a really cool first-person shooter, didn't have Rumble. Rumble didn't come along actually until this game, Star Fox 64. And as you can see, this is a big box because this had the Rumble pack right in the system itself. And Star Fox 64 was also very cool and innovative. It was again, it was never a 2D game, so it translated really well to the N64 because it already had polygons on the Super Nintendo thanks to the FX chip, and it was just really cool. So it translated really well. Obviously, the graphics were way improved in this version, but the big innovation for this game was this little device here, the N64, blown out from the light. If I get closer, will that help? Kinda. The N64 Rumble Pack, which is one of the coolest, most innovative designs, devices that ever came out for a game console. Again, Nintendo 64 was so innovative, and I think people just, again, if you came out or you grew up later and didn't understand, N64 was super impactful and innovative, and that's why it's my favorite console. So, like I said, you could be playing a game that required you to have a memory card, and so it would say, hey, insert memory card now, press the button, saving. Now you can take that out. It'll tell you on screen, you have a Rumble Pack, do you want to use it? Yes, put it in now, hit the button, and then you can use your Rumble Pack. And the rumble in this is really good, even to this day, because you can feel like the little nuances in shaking. It's not just crazy shaking. It is nuanced. The motor inside of this thing is very clever. Now, obviously, it takes AA batteries. There's actually a way you can mod this to where the power would come from the console itself, but the motor isn't as strong when you do that. I've done it. I thought it was really cool. It's really simple. You solder a wire from one point to another, and it will pull power instead of from the battery compartment. It'll pull it from the N64 itself, but the rumble isn't as good. So Nintendo, I guess they knew that, and I mean, they could have done something internally to make it more powerful, but they probably just decided, no, we'll let people buy batteries if they want. I use rechargeables anyway, but I don't think there were any at that time. I cannot remember that. But yeah, super fantastic. And then, like I said, when you're flying along, explosions, you're using your blasters, you can feel different degrees of rumble using the Rumble Pack, and it was just freaking amazing for its time. And obviously, every console since the N64 innovative Rumble Pack, every console has had rumble in the controller at some point. Sony copied it pretty quickly. The DualShock, I think, within a year. But the DualShock, again, is not as good as the Rumble Pack is. It's really not. And it's weird because of where the Rumble Pack is situated on the controller. You would think something that has it built in would be better, but the DualShock is not as good. It still works. It's fine. But I think they had some patented motor technology in the Rumble Pack here, and that's why you could feel cool variations. But this, again, was something that was huge and blew everybody's mind. Force feedback. I don't think it was new at the time. I think there was some PC third-party controllers that did it, maybe. But Nintendo was the one that solidified it as something, not just a gimmick, but a viable thing that, to this day, we have. And the innovations with that even crazier when you look at something like the PS5, the haptic feedback and all that. You look at the Switch with the HD Rumble, they call it. It's just gotten better since this, but this is still very good. I love playing my N64 games using the Rumble Pack there. All right, and then I don't want to get rid of that yet. I got one more thing to show with that. So let's take this bad boy out. And yes, there's more expansions for the controller slot here for the N64 controller. Let me move this out. And the next one is the transfer pack. And the transfer pack is called the transfer pack because it allowed you to keep me back here, I guess. Allowed you to transfer data from Game Boy games into your N64, which was a big thing specifically for this game here, which was hitting its stride. This franchise was hitting its stride. Pokemon Stadium. This franchise was hitting its stride on the Game Boy, and so Nintendo wanted to capitalize on that and expand the N64's audience by making this game Pokemon Stadium, where you could battle your Pokemon in a big 3D arena with nice colors and all that stuff. Something you couldn't do on the Game Boy. So you just take the Pokemon you've been training on your N64 or on your Game Boy, bring them over to the N64 and play them in a 3D. I mean, again, at the time, mind blowing. Today it doesn't get as much credit or thought put into it, but this blew our minds back in the day. This game sold gangbusters. The transfer pack, I'm not sure. I mean, it had to sell pretty well because you needed it to play. Or you didn't need it to play it, but you needed it to transfer your Game Boy Pokemon over into Pokemon Stadium, and that was the way to do it. You take your cartridge, put it right down in there. Take that, put it into your N64 controller, and then you Pokemon Stadium up. You got all your you've been playing Pokemon on your Game Boy all this time. You got all these trained Pokemon. Bring them on over to the N64. Play them on a big, pretty, beautiful 3D arena where you can see your Pokemon for the first time in color and full 3D, and their polygons and they have animations and they're moving around. It's not just doop, 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 like it is on the Game Boy. This was mind-blowing, phenomenal, and again, looking back, people don't give it the same credit that it was given at the time. Super innovative. Now, one of the coolest things about this that never came to fruition, because this was the time where school shootings and whatnot were happening, and the first big one was the Columbine one, and at the time, Rare, the makers of GoldenEye and the upcoming Perfect Dark, they had a cool idea. So the Game Boy had a camera that you could take pictures and then print them out and whatnot of your face and whatnot. And the geniuses at Rare, those guys were so innovative and cool, and they came up with really cool ideas all the time. Geniuses at Rare said, hey, we could use that, have people take a picture of themselves, and basically the N64, or you take the Game Boy camera, plug it into this slot here because it fits, just like a Game Boy cartridge slot, and take a picture of yourself. And as you do that, your photo, like you've seen software today that if you take a picture of yourself, it'll make you a 3D avatar with similar features. They were doing that back on the N64, and so you could take a picture. You could have a character in Perfect Dark. Have your face, and that was a really cool thing that I was clamoring for. I thought that was amazing, but I'm a good, decent human being. I wasn't thinking about all the things that people could take a picture of and put them into this game. There was no way they could stop you from taking. And the first thing people do is take a picture of their members, and I'll just say. And then now you got a person with a member head running around. But that wasn't even as bad. I'm sure they thought about that as well. But I think after Columbine, they didn't want people taking pictures and putting themselves in the games and having other people shoot them, basically. And they said they couldn't get it to work, and then that I knew that was a lie at the time. And then later on came out and said, yeah, Nintendo told us that's probably not the best idea in this climate, and so they kind of canned that. But another cool thing when it came to Perfect Dark was that Perfect Dark got its own Game Boy game, as you can see here. And I love the fact that the casing, the kind of clear, see-through casing, the transparent casing is very similar to the back of the transfer pack. And so when you put this bad boy down in here, it really matches up nicely with the transfer pack, the way the game looks. I'm sure that was on purpose. But yeah, so you could transfer, I can't remember what kind of data between this and Perfect Dark, the game N64 game. But there was some really cool, innovative transferring going on with that. Also, the Game Boy game itself was super innovative because it had, if you look at it's like, this is a weird size for a Game Boy game. Why is it? Because it has a rumble motor here as well. I don't know if you can see it through the casing here. Yeah, it's right there at the top. That is a rumble motor right there. So when you played the Game Boy game on your Game Boy, you would get rumbling, but you needed a battery as well. There's a battery slot there. Take that off, put your little AAA battery in there, and that way you're not pulling power from your Game Boy battery for rumble. And again, super cool, innovative stuff that people forget about. But at the time, again, mind-blowing front and center stuff that was in magazines that gamers were talking about, developers were talking about, and a lot of people were trying to figure out, how can we do that? A lot of the other companies were trying to figure that out. So yeah, another cool thing, well, I forgot to show. Yeah, so Quake 2. There were other games like StarCraft 64, PC games, that the other consoles, couldn't do. The N64 got. StarCraft was insane on a console, and the N64 made it work. It was great. And shooters, obviously, first-person shooters. If you want to play first-person shooter, the best way to play it was on the N64. The hardware could handle it, and the environments looked really nice. And obviously, the 4-player aspect, that you would have to buy an extra thing on like PlayStation or Saturn. You play right out of the box as long as you have enough controllers on the N64. So that was amazing. Also innovative and cool. I think I kind of mentioned it earlier. Software updates, basically, remasters, remastered versions of the same game would come out in the console's life. Like this. This is Super Mario Shindo version. And this, because the N64 Rumble Pack wasn't ready yet when the system launched, Mario 64 didn't have Rumble. But people were like, man, this is a great game to have Rumble in. You do the ground pound, you hit enemies. It'd really be really cool to have Rumble in that big, 3D action platformer game. And so they went back and made another version of this and Wave Race, which is even, I think, better. Because, again, the subtleties in the Rumble, on the Rumble Pack, was really cool for when you hit waves and you feel different variations in the water. So they made Wave Race and Shindo, I think it's called, and Super Mario 64 Shindo, which gave you Rumble Pack, or Rumbling, only in Japan, though. They didn't release it in the West. So if you want it, you have to buy a Japanese version. Or you can buy like a Repro. I think there's Repro versions for the North American one. The Western Super Mario 64. So you can still get the English, but you also get the Rumble, because it's like a repro thing where people made their own carts and they just kind of translated it. So that's cool. But, obviously, again, impactful games. Nintendo's first party was amazing. The first time we got Mario Party was the N64. Mario Tennis, all the Mario sports games, for the most part, I mean, they had tennis and whatnot on Game Boy and NES. but this was the one that really blew those things out because of the 4-player aspect to it. So those games were just phenomenal. Big sports titles, Mario sports titles, or like I said, Mario Party, got its start on the N64. Amazing. And obviously, this was the game. Again, Nintendo made this look easy. They made this top-down game for the most part, and there was obviously a 2D one, second one, but they made this work and worked so well in 3D. This should not be a thing. But Nintendo was very good at translating their 2D games into 3D games, where other companies were not so much. Obviously you got like Final Fantasy was a top-down game, but even when Final Fantasy came out on PlayStation, with the better graphics and whatnot, it was still a top-down kind of it's an isometric kind of view for when you're playing the game. Obviously, when you go into battles and whatnot, it goes into 3D, but it's still not 3D. It's kind of locked off. You can't control the camera and stuff like that. But Nintendo made it look easy, and this is the game of the year. And this is the greatest game of all time, as far as I'm concerned. It's still the most highest rated. Now, I understand that there weren't as many journalistic outlets back then, and so the chance for it to have a higher, but I think the chance for it to have a lower score is also as high because there wasn't as many. If you have 10,000 people reviewing a game, obviously you have more chance of having higher scores, but you also have more chance of having lower scores. So to this day, this is still the highest rated game. To this day, obviously won Game of the Year this year, got a bunch of awards, accolades. Again, this is a game that people will look back now, say, oh, we played 3D games. Nothing special here. But at the time, for all these things to come together, the 2D game, a 2D top-down game, going into full 3D, the elements of the 2D games translating really well and working like really cool in the 3D game was amazing. The worlds, the different areas, the story, the cinematics in this game, top notch all around, blew everybody's mind. And again, you didn't have that. Sure, you had FMVs and whatnot and stuff like that on the other consoles and PC, but nothing brought it all together into one package. Because the graphics, the cinematics in this game are done real time, so you're not completely pulled out. Like say something like Final Fantasy, where you're seeing these really cool, and they are really cool, FMV sequences, and then you cut back and you have this little chibi character that's kind of scraggly looking and kind of cropped and squished little character. And you're like, oh, can we get back to those cool, full CGI characters? No, you get to the little chibi characters. Everything in this game was all in engine, so all the cinematics, all that stuff, were great, and it wasn't expansive, obviously, than you get in the FMV, but it didn't completely take you out of the game when you're actually playing it versus when you're watching a cutscene. And so, I mean, this game, I think it's the best-selling game on the N64, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe Super Mario 64 is higher sales, but I don't know. They're probably right neck and neck. And fantastic. So, and the only other company that came close to what Nintendo was doing was a company that was exclusive to them, and that is Rare. So, make sure we're going along here. Rare is basically Nintendo with a little edge, and so Mario 64, phenomenal. So was this game here, Banjo-Kazooie. This was like playing a Saturday morning cartoon at the time. Again, phenomenal music, visuals, worlds. Like, this was Mario 64, but bigger and better graphics. Didn't have much emphasis on like the platforming. This is more of an adventure game, but as far as like a mascot, kind of cartoon character game goes, top notch. And this is why people love Banjo-Kazooie and why they want a new one is because of this game. Tui was great. It expanded on it. Um, but I think it was a little bit overambitious in many ways. Like the worlds were a little bit too big, and it wasn't as tight as this game was. Um, this game is phenomenal, and you would get games subsequently trying to mimic this and Mario 64 on other consoles, and especially when it came to like the GameCube era, PS2 era, Xbox era. A lot of platformers came out because of games like this, because of Mario 64, because of Banjo-Kazooie. I mean, to this day, you have the buddy platformer because of this game. Banjo and Kazooie, that whole aspect of having two characters together opened up like gameplay mechanics and gameplay ideas. That's because of this game. This game is still impact. When you play Ratchet and Clank, that's because of this game. You know what I'm saying? Like, impactful. This is a game that came out in 1998, and you know it's still impactful to this day. There's still like platformers that coming out of spiritual successors, your ukuleles and whatnot. People clamor for this series because of how good this game specifically is, and how impactful it was on the gaming industry. So don't let people downplay how important this console was. Yes, it only sold 33 million units roughly, but the hardware implications, the software obviously, is what really made this console stand out. And I believe, so we can move into the next segment. Oh no, let me do one more thing real quick. Other innovations where the console lacked quantity, but the quality that it had, it was top notch. So it was very innovative when it came to different genres. It was innovative when it came to 3D platformers. It was innovative when it came to racing games. Racing games were freaking amazing on the N64. People don't talk about it as much as well either, because it's a racing game, so it's a certain amount of people that even care about those. But fighting games. There were a lot of fighting games on the N64, but I think only two of them were really innovative. I think this came out first, but Fighter's Destiny was one of the most innovative fighting games I have ever played, because it was like Olympics. if street fighting was in the Olympics. That's kind of what Fighter's Destiny is. So it was like a point system for knockdowns and whatnot. And there was all kind of cool ways to do that. So you could be pummeling somebody, but if you don't get them down, you don't get the points. And in certain ways, you knock them down. Also decides on how many points you get. And that was just like not a thing when it came to fighting games. The graphics are great. I think the presentation is really good. A lot of people haven't heard about this game. This game sold pretty well, but it was very innovative, and that's what I loved about it, how innovative it was. And there's some really cool characters in here, too. I learned a lot of the characters fighting moves because I was really, really into this game. And it's great. So, but I think the most innovative game, fighting game on the console, you guys already know, is Super Smash Bros. I mean, this game, this is not the one that was remembered the most. That's probably Melee, but I would say Ultimate is actually at the top over Melee even. But when this came out, first of all, innovative marketing. It was really cool to see that Happy Together commercial. And at the time, Nintendo was not edgy. And so you see Nintendo characters galloping along in a field, Mario, Pikachu, Samus, and whatnot. Donkey Kong just kind of, skipping together and with that Happy Together music. And then all of a sudden they start fighting each other. You start hearing punch sounds, comical punch, beat 'em up sounds, and they start pummeling each other. Still my favorite gaming commercial of all time. But yeah, again, this is not your typical fighting game. This is you gotta beat somebody up enough to where you knock them out of their arena completely, and fun as heck. Like, you didn't have to be like an expert fighter to play this game initially, but you can get deeper into it. Obviously, this wasn't the one that you can get ultimately super deep in. It wasn't until Melee where people got like really crazy with the mechanics, but this started it all, and it started on the N64. And I mean, there's nothing much else I can say about Smash. You guys already know, but fantastic. So let's talk about hardware. So N64 is often forgotten as pretty much the first console with limited edition and different variations. I should have researched that and look, but I was just kind of thinking in my gamer mind, had there really been like, there's been different iterations of a console, like a different design. But as far as like, you got to buy this because look how cool this looks version, that didn't really happen until the N64. So like I said, there is the standard charcoal black or charcoal gray, whatever you want to call it, N64. But then the next one that I remember anyway, if I'm not mistaken, again, this is all top of my head, not researched, is the Jungle Green N64 that came out with Donkey Kong 64. Now, this is the game that if you didn't have an expansion pack, it didn't work. The rumor for a long time was that there was a game-breaking bug in this game, and it only worked if you put the expansion pack in, but the developers of the game within the last few years came out and said, no, this game, if you look at it, obviously there's a lot of, the worlds are huge, but the visuals, the effects in this game can't be done on a typical N64 without the expansion pack. So this game needed the expansion pack because of the effects and the size of the game. The big open worlds without crazy N64 fog. And so this came out, I want to say 99, right? That's when the system came out. I remember I was working at a grocery store at the time, and my manager got one from like a promo thing, and I was super jealous. And I was like, I gotta have one of those. I'm a crazy N64 fanatic. And I got one as soon as I could. And this was my original, something rattling around in there. I'm gonna get it out. But this is my favorite color, especially when you put the banana yellow cartridge in there. It just looks really good together. It's one of the best design versions, obviously. And the 3D logo, the N64 has green in it, and any color that's on that logo looks really good. But I think the green is the best. Obviously, the green controller came with it. I have it right here. That was part of that package. So I just dropped it. So to my knowledge, there wasn't any variations like that. So I got a couple of them. I have the I forget what they call this, aqua blue or something. But this is Japanese. This is because the Japanese ones have two-tone. So the bottom would be this color, which is kind of a off-white, and the top would be the variation. I think they're all like that when it comes to the Japanese versions. They all have this two-tone kind of look to them. And there's the controller for that there. Also two-toned, which is pretty cool. But one of the biggest ones, especially at the time, because this was a huge franchise that was emerging, is the Pikachu N64. And this makes their N64 a bit wider, but it's just like super cool. I mean, you got Pikachu on the cover there, and the reset button is 1 foot. The power button's not the other foot. Where's the power button? Oh yeah, power button is the Pokeball. So you put it up, power up and down, and the reset button is this toe or this foot. So that was cool. Very cool. And it's just, I like the colors together. The blue and yellow look really cool together. It's really nice. And the controller also, two-tone, nice and cool, real nice. I haven't played on this much, so the stick is pretty fantastic on this. But again, especially with the yellow C buttons, this blue, it just looked really good with the system because it's for Pikachu, but it has the yellow in it, so it looks really nice. One innovation that I don't have is a huge innovation, and it's kind of one of my holy grails. I have two. One holy grail is the Panasonic GameCube that only came out in Japan. And I don't even care if it works. I just want one. As long as it still lights up. I don't care if the disk drive works or any of that stuff. I just want it in my collection. But for the N64, it is the 64 disk drive. And again, as a guy who is super into 64, I was reading magazines and anticipating this thing forever. It never ended up coming out here in the West, technically. It only came out in Japan. And it didn't sell well at all. They didn't market it. I don't think they didn't have a lot of faith in it. It was way at the end of the life cycle. If it came out in 97, maybe 98, that would have been great. But basically, these carts are very expensive. The memory on them is limited. And so Nintendo wanted to make a cheaper, way to give us games. And the N64 disk drive is basically floppies. I don't know if you guys ever heard of floppies, but floppies is like a tape-based, kind of even rewritable, disk drive or disk, where it has like this kind of plastic tape inside, and there's a little thing you can open up and see it. It's kind of like hard for me to explain what a tape is if you don't know, but it's just like this kind of brown-looking or sometimes black. Kind of film. It's basically what's inside of a CD. Let me see if I have one I can reach here. So, yeah, I'm gonna try to pull this out without. Here, I'll just use one here. All right, I got Final Fantasy here. So, oh, that's not the best because you can't see because they have they have the black. Let's see if I can. Here we go. All right, so I pulled out Minecraft. All right, so. A lot of people still don't even realize this, but CDs, where it's stored at, the information on the CD is not actually on the plastic. There is a little film in between two pieces of plastic here. So you have a round cylinder on the outside, round cylinder on this side, and then inside there is like a plasticky kind of film that it's pressured and stuck together in there, and that's where the data actually is. Now, back in the day, we had computers that had floppy disk drives. It was like they called it floppies because they were floppy, and they were made with plastic that you can kind of bend and fold and whatnot. But it had the little disc inside of it, just like this, a little film or whatever, and it would store, and you can write and rewrite onto those discs. And these discs don't do that, although there are rewritable CDs. I remember rewritable CDs and DVDs back in the day that I used to keep stuff stored on. But they didn't do that for games because they were worried about people, pirating and whatnot. So I understand that. But that's where actually the data is stored. So Nintendo tried to come up with this disk drive to alleviate some of those costs and also come up with new innovative things that basically is what DLC is today. So the disk drive itself, the N64 disk drive, had a modem. It was hooked up to the internet. You could download, upload stuff, which was super innovative back in those days. But one of the big things was that you can make tracks on F-Zero, the expansion kit, and you can upload your tracks so other people can play them, which is something Nintendo does now, obviously, and a lot of companies did subsequently later. But super innovative, the N64 disk drive was, and it was just a creation tool that would allow DLC like we have today. So like the Master Quest, that's on, I think it came out on the GameCube. If you pre-ordered Wind Waker, you got the disc with all the Zeldas on it, and it had the Master Quest. The Master Quest was supposed to be this 60 N64's disk drives kind of DLC, like a different version of the same game. So if you ever played the Master Quest for Ocarina of Time, the world is all messed up. Everything's different from the game you played. And enemies are harder, kind of stuff like that. And that was just like what the disk drive could allow. So you could take games you already played and expand them into different ways. And again, in the mid '90s, the late '90s, that was mind blowing. Again, we take it for granted now, but you have to look at the time period when these things were happening. The N64 was so stinking innovative. And there is a U.S. prototype of the N64 DD. I think Metal Jesus Rocks. I don't know if he owns it or somebody let him use it. I think he owns it. So they were going to release this thing, and they just pulled the plug at the last minute. And the sad thing is that they didn't release any software for it. So it doesn't work. Like, it can't even play like the Japanese games. I don't think will work in the 64 disk drive. So you just need a Japanese one, and that's. I wish I would have pulled the trigger and bought one years ago when it was more reasonable to buy one. Now it's just like stupid expensive. Maybe I'll make a trade or something for one of my more expensive games. But because I really do want one, and I want a few of the disk drive tapes. I just thought it looked cool. The design of the floppy, if you want to call them floppy disks, of the N64 disk drive, they just look cool to me, and I always wanted one. And I was waiting, and they pulled the plug on it for the U.S. release, and I was so upset. But again, just talking about the innovation of the console, a lot of firsts, 2D games going into 3D. First-person shooters on console. We had those before, but they were so clunky. I remember Doom on Super Nintendo was just trash. It was not good. Doom on even Sega Saturn wasn't that good. It wasn't until the N64 came out with the controller and the stability that the hardware allowed that we got like real good first-person shooter games. That was the place to go for FPS games in the '90s, late '90s, on console was the N64. That was the only place really to go. They had them on other consoles, but they were nowhere near as good as the N64 versions. 3D platformers, nowhere near as good. Yes, they were good. Spyro was good, but it didn't touch, Banjo-Kazooie. Couldn't come close to Banjo-Kazooie. It's beloved and liked by a lot of guys because they're like, oh, I don't have an N64. This is the next best thing, Spyro. But it was not close to what Banjo-Kazooie was doing. Still a phenomenal game. I still really like Spyro. But comparatively, not as good. Racing games were the best on, again, N64. Arguably, obviously, Gran Turismo was the biggest racing game at the time, and that was on PlayStation. But I'm talking about the sheer volume and just variety of racing games. You got to get it on N64 to get that. Wrestling games, how you pronounce it? Is it AKO or AKO or the WWE or WWF at the time, and the NWO games and whatnot were were phenomenal on the N64. Nobody's wrestling games touched the wrestling games on the N64. They were fantastic. So yes, it was limited when it came to RPGs and other genres of games. It didn't have nowhere near the variety of library that the PlayStation had, or even the Sega Saturn. But as far as game impact in the industry, N64 can't be touched. And that's why, to this day, it is still my favorite game console of all time. So yeah, that's my video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It's super long, but I'm always going to be happy to talk about the N64, my favorite console of all time. Again, don't let people tell you no nonsense about the controller. These controllers were like super innovative, phenomenal. You saw all the things that they do nobody talks about. Like, firsts. The transfer pack, amazing. The memory card slot, and the Rumble pack, amazing. Like, untouchable, what the N64 was doing at the time. So, yeah, that's my video. Let me know what you guys think. You got any memories on the N64? You agree with a lot of my points here, or none of my points? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for watching and listening, and now, see you fools next time. Peace out.